Here's the first part of the story, titled Don't Listen to Her. She's mad, they said, for the alien widow. But the human Daydan found the truth, written in 950 words, third-person style, using simple, basic English, and ensuring the content is interesting and violated-free. John sat alone on the edge of the colony's central square, his boots kicking the dust beneath him. The bustling sounds of everyday life filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere. The whispers had started again, the ones about Lyra. Some said she was mad. Others claimed she had lost her mind after the death of her family. They all agreed she was dangerous. John had heard it all before. "Don't go near her," the other soldiers would say. "She's trouble." But something about the way people spoke about her made John curious. There was fear in their voices, but there was also a strange sort of reverence, as if they didn't quite understand her, but feared what she might do if provoked. He wasn't like the others. John had always been the type to question things. If everyone said she was mad, he wondered if there was more to it. He had seen people get lost in grief, broken by loss, but that didn't mean they were crazy, just meant they were searching for something, for answers that the world wasn't giving them. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, John stood up. He knew where Lyra was. She lived on the outskirts of the colony, far from the watchful eyes of the others. It was there, in the quiet isolation of her small home, that she spent most of her days. The rumors about her family were hard to ignore. Lyra had been married to an alien warrior, someone powerful, someone important. And then, in one terrible night, they were all gone. Her husband, her children, everyone. People said it was an accident. Some whispered it was a murder. And others said it was her fault. But Lyra never spoke about it. Instead, she kept to herself. Mumbling about things that didn't make sense, John had been stationed on the planet for 6 months. And in all that time, he never once spoke to her. He had seen her from a distance, her pale skin, her dark eyes full of sorrow, her long flowing hair that seemed to shimmer in the light. She looked so fragile, so lost. But John had always been told to avoid her, to keep his distance. But today, something was different. Today, the whispers were louder, more insistent. "She's mad," they said. "Stay away from her." John shook his head, deciding it was time to find out for himself. He walked through the narrow streets, passing by the homes of the other soldiers and civilians. Everyone seemed to be going about their day, but there was an air of unease, as though people were waiting for something. A storm, perhaps, or a fight. But no one was willing to confront the truth. When John finally reached her home, he hesitated. It wasn't much, just a small, weathered building on the edge of the settlement, surrounded by overgrown plants and a broken fence. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of life inside. But John could feel the weight of something. Something that made him uneasy, but also compelled him to knock. He raised his hand and knocked 3 times. The sound echoed through the empty space. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing Lyra. She stood in the doorway, her face unreadable, her eyes a mixture of sadness and something else, something that John couldn't quite place. She was taller than most humans, her features sharp and alien. But there was a grace in her movements that he couldn't deny. "You're John, right?" She asked quietly, her voice soft but steady. John nodded, feeling his heart race. "Yes, I wanted to talk to you. About everything." Lyra stepped back, silently inviting him in. John hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. No one was around. The colony's central square was far behind him, and he was alone with her now. He stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. A few scattered books lay on a table, and there were drawings pinned to the walls, strange alien symbols that seemed to swirl in intricate patterns. "Please sit," she said, motioning to a chair by the small table. Her movements were slow, careful, as if she were still unsure of herself. John sat down, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. He wasn't sure where to begin, so he started with the question everyone else had been asking. "Why do they say you're mad?" Lyra's expression didn't change, but her eyes seemed to cloud with sadness. "'Cause they don't understand," she said quietly. They don't know what happened to my family. John leaned forward, intrigued. What happened to them? Her lips tightened. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up and walked over to a small box on a shelf. After a moment, she returned with an old photograph. She handed it to John. It was a picture of her family, her husband, her children, and herself. They were standing together in front of a large structure, smiling, but John could see it in her eyes. There was something in her face that hinted at a deep, unspoken sorrow. This was taken before everything changed, she said. Before they came for us, who came for you? John asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra sat back down, her hands shaking as she spoke. The people here, the ones you trust, they killed my family, and now they want me to forget. They want me to say nothing. John's mind raced. He had heard rumors about corruption, about the higher-ups in the colony hiding secrets. But this was something else entirely. Why haven't you said anything before? He asked. Because no one would believe me, Lyra replied. They've already labeled me as mad, but I'm not. I'm just trying to find the truth. John stared at her, unsure of what to say. The words hung heavy in the air, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the ramblings of a madwoman. This was something real, something that needed to be uncovered, and he was going to help her. John left Lyra's home with a heavy mind. The weight of her words lingered long after he stepped back into the colony's streets. He had heard the rumors, of course, but hearing the truth from her lips, there was something different about. It wasn't just about the loss of her family. It was about something much bigger, something hidden beneath layers of lies. We could feel it now, like an itch he couldn't scratch, gnawing at the back of his mind. Lyra wasn't just some grieving widow, she was someone who had been wronged. And the truth of what happened to her family was buried deep, hidden away by the very people who ran the colony. As John made his way back to his barracks, he couldn't help but think about the photograph she had shown him. The image of a happy family, smiling in front of an unknown building. Lyra's husband, tall and strong, with eyes full of pride. Her children, laughing, completely unaware of the danger that was about to strike. There she was, standing beside them, her face radiant with love. But now all of that was gone. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about the colony's leaders. He had never thought to question them, never wondered what secrets they might be hiding. They were the ones in charge, the ones who had kept everything running smoothly. But now, something felt wrong. The way the colony's leaders turned a blind eye to Lyra's pain, the way they called her Medit, all pointed to something dark and hidden. When John returned to his barracks, he barely acknowledged the other soldiers. His mind was elsewhere. He had to find out more. If Lyra's story was true, it meant that the leaders of the colony had been lying to everyone. But how could he prove it? That night, he decided to visit the colony's archives. It was a place most people avoided, a room filled with old records and encrypted data that no one ever really bothered to look through. It was the perfect place to hide secrets. And John had a feeling the truth about Lyra's family would be buried there. The archives were located beneath the main building, and the entrance was locked as usual. But John knew the code. It was something he had learned during his time here. He punched in the numbers, and the heavy door creaked open. Inside, the room was cold and silent, the only light coming from the flickering lamps on the walls. Rows of data files stretched out before him, each one holding information that could be important. John wasn't sure where to begin, but his gut told him to start with the records of the colony's leaders. He pulled up the first file he found, and his heart sank as he read through it. There were accounts of political maneuvers, alliances made and broken, and promises that were never kept. But there was something else, hidden within the page's references to a powerful alien artifact that had been discovered long before John's arrival. The artifact was said to have the power to reshape entire planets, to bend reality itself. The records were vague, filled with cryptic language. It wasn't clear who had discovered the artifact or why it had been kept hidden. But one thing was certain, the colony's leaders knew about it, and they had gone to great lengths to keep its secret. John's fingers trembled as he continued to dig through the files. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. Lyra's family had found out about the artifact. They had uncovered its secrets, and they had paid the price for it. John didn't know how they had died, but he had a sinking feeling that it wasn't an accident. He quickly copied the files onto a secure data drive and left the archives, his mind spinning with questions. How much did the colony's leaders know? Why had they killed Lyra's family? And what had they hoped to gain by hiding the truth? As John made his way back to his quarters, he was stopped by one of the other soldiers. It was Marcus, a friend of his from basic training. Marcus looked uneasy, as though he had been waiting for John to return. "John," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I've been hearing things. People are starting to ask questions about you and Lyra." John raised an eyebrow. "What kind of questions?" "People are starting to wonder why you're spending so much time with her," Marcus said, his voice low. "They say she's dangerous, that she's been talking about things that don't make sense. And now you're digging into the colony's records. You've got to be careful, man. This could get you in trouble." John felt a knot form in his stomach. "I'm just trying to help her," he said firmly. "She didn't kill her family. She didn't deserve to be treated this way." Marcus shook his head, his expression conflicted. "I don't know, John. I've been here longer than you. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. The colony's leaders? They don't take kindly to people poking around in things they've buried." John's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" "Just saying, don't get yourself involved in something you don't understand," Marcus warned. "Some things are better left alone." John's mind raced. He had to make a choice. He could back down, pretend he hadn't learned anything, and walk away from Lyra, or he could keep digging, keep uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. He made his decision. "I'm not backing down," John said, his voice steady. "I'm going to find out what happened to her family. I'm going to make sure the truth comes out." Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "I hope you know what you're doing." With that, Marcus walked away, leaving John alone with his thoughts. John looked down at the data drive in his hand. The truth was out there. He was going to find it no matter what. John sat in his small room, the data drive resting on the table in front of him. His fingers hovered over it, unsure of what to do next. The information he had uncovered in the archives weighed heavily on his mind. He had always known there was more to Lyra's story than what people were saying, but now he had proof. Proof that the colony's leaders were hiding something dangerous. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts were a whirlwind. The artifact Lyra's family had discovered. The secret the leaders were keeping it was all starting to come together, but he didn't know how far this would go. What if the conspiracy went deeper than he could imagine? What if the colony itself was in on it? The thought of that made his stomach churn. He had always trusted the leaders, followed their orders without question. But now, that trust felt like a lie. How could they have allowed something so dangerous to be hidden for so long? And why had they killed Lyra's family for uncovering it? The questions were endless. But John knew one thing for sure. He couldn't keep this to himself. He had to find answers, not just for Lyra, but for everyone in the colony. The next day, John made his way to the central square again, trying to act as normal as possible. He didn't want anyone to suspect that he was involved in anything suspicious. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, everywhere he went. People glanced at him with wary eyes. Whispers followed him wherever he walked. When he reached the usual gathering spot near the barracks, he spotted Marcus talking to another soldier. John hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should talk to Marcus about the information he had uncovered. But then he thought better of it. Marcus had warned him to stay out of this. If he said anything now, he might be dragged into something he wasn't ready for. Instead, John walked in the opposite direction, towards the outskirts of the colony. He had to speak to Lyra again. She was the key to understanding everything. She had seen the artifact, known its power, and she had suffered for it. 8. John needed to hear more from her. The truth was out there, and he was determined to find it. Lyra's house was just as he remembered it, small, isolated, with overgrown plants creeping up the sides of the building. He knocked on the door, this time with more confidence. He had to know what she knew. The door opened slowly, and Lyra stood there, her face tired but calm. When she saw John, she stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. "I was hoping you'd return," she said quietly, closing the door behind him. John didn't waste any time. "Lyra, I found something," he said, pulling the data drive. From his pocket, it went through the records, and there's something they've been hiding. Your family, they weren't just killed. They found something dangerous. Lyra's eyes flickered with a mix of sadness and recognition. She didn't seem surprised. She had known, in her heart, that there was more to her family's death than a random accident. "I've known for a long time," she said softly, but no one would listen. "They told me I was mad, that I was just grieving. But I wasn't. No, I knew what they did." John placed the data drive on the table between them. "What exactly did they find? What was this artifact your family discovered?" Lyra looked down, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something much more powerful. It had the ability to change things, space, time, even reality itself. My husband, ... he was one of the first to find it. Thought it was a gift from the stars, something that could save us, change everything for the better. But the leaders of this colony, they didn't see it that way. They saw it as a threat to their control. John listened carefully, his mind racing. He had always thought of the artifact as some sort of alien technology, but the idea that it could alter reality itself was something else. "So they killed them to keep it hidden?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "They couldn't let anyone know. They knew the power of the artifact, and they feared what might happen if it fell into the wrong hands. So they made my family disappear." John sat back, stunned by her words. This was bigger than he had imagined. The colony's leaders weren't just hiding the truth, they were protecting something that could change the entire galaxy. And now, they would do anything to keep it hidden. "Do you know where the artifact is now?" John asked, his voice urgent. Lyra hesitated, her gaze distant. "I don't know," she admitted. "It was taken the night they killed my family. The last I saw of it, it was locked away in a hidden vault beneath the colony's main building. But no one can get to it. It's heavily guarded. Even if you knew where it was, you couldn't get to it." John felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let this go. He had already come this far. Now it was time to find the artifact and expose the truth, no matter the cost. "We have to try," he said firmly. "We'll find it, and we'll make sure it's never used for their control." Lyra looked at him, a mixture of fear and hope in her eyes. "You're willing to risk everything for this? For the truth?" John nodded. "I am. We have to stop them before they hurt anyone else." The air between them was thick with the weight of their decision. They were about to take on the most powerful people in the colony. They didn't know what would happen next, but they knew one thing for sure. The truth had to come out. And with that, they began to plan. The mission wasn't going to be easy, but they were no longer afraid of the leaders. They were ready to fight for what was right. John and Lyra stood together in her small home, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. The plan was risky, and they both knew it. The artifact, hidden beneath the colony's main building, was guarded by layers of security. They had no choice. They had to try. If the leaders of the colony were as corrupt as they seemed, they couldn't let them keep something so dangerous hidden. Lyra's eyes were filled with determination, but there was a sadness in them too. She had lost everything once. Now she was about to risk everything again, but this time she wasn't alone. "Do you really think we can get to it?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but tinged with fear. "We have to," John replied. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart was racing. The risk of being caught was high, and if they were discovered, there was no telling what the colony's leaders would do to them. But they had to act quickly. The longer the artifact remained hidden, the more dangerous it became. John had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance they had. The first step was to get past the outer security systems. That would be the hardest part. The main building was heavily guarded, and there were surveillance cameras everywhere. But John knew the layout of the building. He'd been stationed there long enough to memorize every corner, every hidden door. He just needed Lyra's help to get past the main security checkpoints. "I can't do this without you," John said, turning to Lyra. "I need you to guide me to the vault." Lyra nodded, though a shadow of doubt crossed her face. "I know the way, but we'll have to be careful. They won't just let us walk in." "I'll be careful," John reassured her. "We'll get through this together." They spent the next few hours preparing. John gathered a few tools from the barracks, things he thought they might need to disable some of the security systems. Lyra, meanwhile, went over her memories of the building's layout, recalling every hallway, every secret passage. The vault, she told him, was located beneath the main building in a room that could only be accessed through a hidden stairwell. It was supposed to be impenetrable. But Lyra had been there before, and she remembered the path. As the evening approached, John and Lyra made their way toward the building. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. The colony's streets were mostly empty now, the workers finishing their shifts and heading home. The guards at the entrance to the building barely gave them a second glance as they passed. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows, avoiding the main pathways. When they reached the back of the building, John's heart skipped a beat. This was it. They were almost there. Lyra led the way to a small, nondescript door on the side of the building. It was tucked away from view, almost hidden. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a keycard. It was one of the few things she had kept from her family's time with the colony's leadership. With a soft beep, the door slid open. John followed Lyra inside, and the door shut quietly behind them. They were now in the building's service area, a maze of narrow hallways and storage rooms. It was dark and quiet, except for the soft hum of the building's power systems. Moved swiftly, keeping low, and avoiding the security cameras that dotted the hallways. Lyra whispered instructions, guiding John through the twists and turns of the service tunnels. She knew the path better than anyone. "Stay close," Lyra said, her voice barely audible. "We're almost there," Nod nodded, trying to stay as silent as possible. His senses were on high alert. He could hear footsteps echoing down the hall from time to time, and his heart raced every time they passed a security camera. But they moved quickly, staying in the shadows, avoiding detection. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the stairwell. It was hidden behind a thick metal door, which was locked, but Lyra already had the key to it. She unlocked the door with a soft click, and they descended into the lower levels of the building. The air grew colder as they moved deeper underground. The walls were thick and damp, and the only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps. They reached the bottom of the stairs and stood before a large, reinforced door. This was at the entrance to the vault. Lyra hesitated for a moment, her hand on the door's control panel. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. John nodded. "We don't have much time." With a deep breath, Lyra pressed the button, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a large, dimly lit room, filled with rows of metal shelves. And there, in the center of the room, sat a glass case. Inside the case was the artifact. It was a small, cylindrical object, no bigger than a human's hand, but it seemed to glow with an otherworldly energy. Even from a distance, John could feel its power. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew it was dangerous. Dangerous enough to destroy everything if it fell into the wrong hands. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the artifact. "This is it," she whispered, almost in awe. "This is what they killed my family for." John stepped closer, his heart pounding. The artifact was right there within reach. But as he moved forward, a loud alarm suddenly blared throughout the building. "Damn it!" John cursed. "We've been spotted." Lyra's face went pale. "Need to move now." Turned and ran, knowing that time was running out. The leaders of the colony wouldn't let them escape without a fight. They had to get out. They had to take the artifact and expose the truth, no matter what the cost. The alarm echoed throughout the building, a harsh, shrill sound that made John's heart race. Lyra grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit. The vault door had barely closed behind them when the heavy footsteps of guards started to echo. In the distance, they didn't have much time. "We have to move fast," John said, trying to steady his breathing. "The guards will be here any second." Lyra nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but there was no hesitation in her steps. She knew what had to be done. They couldn't stop now. The hallway stretched out before them, dark and silent. John knew they couldn't go back the way they had come. The stairwell was too risky. They would be trapped. Instead, Lyra pulled him down a side hallway, one that John didn't recognize. It was narrower, tucked away from the main pathways, but it was their best chance. They moved quickly, staying as quiet as possible, their footsteps echoing softly in the emptiness. John could feel the weight of the artifact in his bag, the small, powerful object they had stolen from the vault. It felt like it was pulsing with energy, and he wasn't sure if that was his imagination or if the artifact really did have that much power. But either way, it was too dangerous to be left in the hands of the colony's leaders. As they neared the end of the hallway, he saw the exit at another door, leading out to the outer service areas. But just as they approached, a sharp voice rang out behind them. "Stop right there," a guard shouted. John's heart skipped a beat. The alarm had done its job. They were surrounded. Lyra froze for a moment, and John could see the panic in her eyes. They couldn't outrun the guards now, not with the artifact in their possession. The soldiers were closing in fast, and there was no way out unless they fought their way through. Without thinking, John turned to Lyra. "Go," he ordered. "Get to the door. I'll hold them off." "No." Lyra's voice was sharp, but John didn't give her a choice. He grabbed her arm and pushed her toward the exit. "Go. I'll catch up." Lyra hesitated for only a second, but it was enough. She bolted for the door, her movements swift and desperate. John turned to face the guards, trying to buy her as much time as possible. He knew he couldn't take on all of them alone, but he had to try. The first guard rounded the corner, a rifle in hand, but John was ready. He lunged forward, knocking the rifle aside and tackling the soldier to the ground. It wasn't a perfect move, but it bought him precious seconds. The other guard shouted, charging toward him, but John was already on the move, ducking behind a stack of crates. He could hear the guards shouting at each other, trying to figure out where he had gone, but John wasn't waiting around to find out. He knew Lyra had made it to the door, and that was all that mattered. If he could just hold them off for a few more minutes, it would have a chance to escape. John moved quietly through the shadows, staying low, trying to make himself as small as possible. His heart pounded in his chest as he listened to the guards move past him, their boots scraping against the floor. He waited until the last one passed by before he stood up and moved quickly toward the door. But as he reached the door, a voice called out sharp and clear, "He's heading for the back. Don't let him escape." John froze. He had been spotted. There was no time left. He reached for the door, hoping it would open, but it wouldn't budge. The security system had locked it from the outside, damn it. John cursed, his mind racing. He turned around, looking for any other way out, but the guards were closing in again. There was no way out, no way to escape. But then he heard the sound of another door opening, and Lyra appeared at the far end of the hallway. She was panting, her face streaked with sweat, but she had the look of someone who wasn't going to give up. "John," she shouted, "I found another way out. Come on." Without a second thought, John sprinted toward her, dodging a guard who was trying to cut him off. Lyra held open the door and John dove through just as the guards reached them. They slammed. The door shut behind them, and John heard the sound of fists pounding against the metal. For a moment, they stood in the quiet darkness, catching their breath. They had made it. They had escaped. Lyra was the first to speak. "That was too close," she said, her voice shaky. John nodded, still trying to steady his racing heart. "We've got to keep moving. We're not out of danger yet." They were outside now, in the colony's service areas, and there was no one around. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. But John knew it wouldn't be long before the alarms were raised again. The leaders wouldn't let them get away so easily. They had to get back to the safe house, to a place where they could figure out what to do with the artifact. The colony's leaders would stop at nothing to get it back, and John wasn't sure how much longer they could stay hidden. But for now, They had a small window of time. They had to make the most of it. "Where do we go now?" Lyra asked, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. "We find a place to hide," John said, his voice steady. "Then we figure out what to do with this." He patted the bag with the artifact, feeling its weight once more. Lyra nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "We won't let them win." John glanced at her, a small smile forming on his lips. "No, we won't." And with that, they began to move again, knowing that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. The truth had been uncovered, but it was far from over. They had the artifact, and now they had to protect it. John and Lyra walked through the darkened streets, the shadows of the colony surrounding them. The faint glow of the colony's lights illuminated the path ahead, but they knew they couldn't stay out in the open for long. The alarm had been triggered, and the entire colony was now on high alert. The guards would be searching for them, and it wouldn't be long before they were caught. "We need to get to the safe house," Lyra said, her voice low. "It's not far from here, but we have to be careful. They'll be looking for us." John nodded. They had barely escaped the building with the artifact, and now they had to find a way to get it out of the colony. The leaders wouldn't stop until they had it back, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who got in their way. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, their steps muffled by the quiet of the night. John could feel the weight of the artifact pressing against his side, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. The artifact was small, but its power was unimaginable. The colony's leaders had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. And now that it was in their hands, they knew they had to protect it at all costs. The safe house wasn't far, just a small, abandoned building on the outskirts of the colony. It was hidden away from the main paths, and it had been the place where Lyra had spent the last few years, trying to piece together the truth about her family's death. It was the one place she could trust, the one place where no one would think to look for them. As they approached the safe house, John felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it this far, but the journey wasn't over yet. They still had to figure out what to do with the artifact and how to expose the truth without getting caught. Lyra led the way into the safe house, her eyes scanning the area as she pushed open the door. Inside, the room was small and cluttered, with old furniture covered in dust. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a dim glow over the room. John followed her inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The room was empty, but it felt safe, at least for now. Lyra quickly moved to the small desk in the corner, pulling out a map and some old documents. She had been preparing for this moment for a long time, and now they had to act quickly. "Here," she said, spreading the map out on the table. "This is where the artifact was kept. I've been trying to piece together the puzzle for years, but now we have everything we need." John looked at the map, his brow furrowing. "But where do we go from here? The leaders will be coming after us. They'll search every corner of the colony." "We can't stay here long," Lyra replied. "But we have to find a way to get the artifact out of the colony. There's a shuttle dock on the other side of the settlement. If we can make it there, we can get off-world. But we'll need to be careful. The shuttle will be heavily guarded." John nodded. But they didn't have any other choice. The artifact had to be taken off the colony, and if they stayed here, they'd be trapped. "We'll need to move fast," John said. "Let's gather our things and go." Lyra quickly packed a small bag with food and supplies, making sure they had everything they needed.
Ow.
John checked his weapon, making sure it was ready, just in case. He didn't want to fight, but if it came down to it, he would. As they prepared to leave, a sudden thought struck John. "Lyra, what exactly is this artifact? What does it do?" Lyra paused, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It's not just a weapon or a tool. It has the power to change things, space, time, even reality itself. My family discovered it by accident, and they realized that it was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The leaders of the colony knew about it and wanted to keep it hidden. They didn't want anyone to know about its power, especially not my family." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had known the artifact was important, but the way Lyra described it made it seem far more dangerous than he had first thought. If it could really change reality, the consequences of it falling into the wrong hands were unimaginable. "Why did they kill your family?" John asked, his voice low. "Because they couldn't let anyone know what they had found," Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. "My husband, my children. They were all killed because they wanted to stop the leaders from using the artifact for their own gain. They thought it could be used to control everything: people, planets, even time itself." John's mind raced. If the leaders of the colony had been hiding something like that, they would stop at nothing to keep it under wraps. Artifact held could change everything, and now it was in their hands. "We have to get it off this planet," John said, his voice firm. "We can't let them use it. We have to stop them." Lyra nodded. "I agree, but we have to be careful. The leaders will stop at nothing to get it back. They'll do anything." John's eyes hardened with resolve. "I don't care what they do. We're not going to let them win." With their bags packed and their plan in place, John and Lyra made their way out of the safe house. The streets were quiet, but John knew that it wouldn't last. The colony's leaders would be searching for them, and they had to move quickly if they wanted to make it to the shuttle. They walked through the shadows, staying out of sight, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Every corner could be a trap, every shadow could hide a guard. But they had no choice. They had to make it to the shuttle, and they had to do it fast. As they approached the shuttle dock, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. John tensed, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. The guards were getting closer. "Get ready," he whispered to Lyra. They couldn't turn back now. They had come too far.